Hello everyone and welcome to another exciting Talk No Jutsu!
This one hurts my head.
I mean, that's fine. There's a lot of numbers and statistics for this one. There's a lot of figuring things out.
Why don't you lead us off by explaining because this is sort of what we need to establish first, the difference between Shonen Jump as we know it in the West and Shonen Jump as it is in Japan.
Yeah. So we here in the United States of America and in other English-speaking countries know of this thing called Shonen Jump. And for us, it was originally published as a magazine. Some of you may have even had subscriptions to it when it was an ongoing publication as Shonen Jump the magazine, where there would be the newest chapter of whatever assortment of things that were being published at the time, You may have had an episode that published chapters of Bleach, Naruto, One Piece, Fairy Tail, and Attack on Titan all at the same time, Just one chapter. Or more, because it was a monthly publication, Shonen Jump was. But that's only Shonen Jump, which is the name of it is licensed from Asia by the Viz Media Company. In Asia, you actually have Shonen Weekly and Shonen Jump, which are two separate magazines by two separate publishers with entirely different content. And some of the content of each of these was kind of thrown into Shonen Jump, the English publication. So just to start off, the Japanese publications don't contain the same things that English publications do. The companies don't mix with one another. There are essentially three big publishing companies in Japan for manga and light novels. There's Kodansha, which is the largest publisher, Karakawa, and Shueisha, which is a branch off of the Shogakukan, which is a much larger company that doesn't necessarily focus in just printed media. So that's where we're going to start today, the three major publishing companies. And also why they're the reason that it's not easy for us to get manga in the US.
Yeah. God, it's such a damn rabbit hole.
It is. We spent like a 6-hour phone call 2 weeks ago on this, and then we just spent another 3 hours earlier. This has been a significant chunk of our time.
Forgive us if we have this wrong, by the way.
Yeah, we did a lot of Googling, and from what I understand, this is what's happening. And so each of these, obviously, so Shonen Jump is a shonen publication, right? And for example, Shueisha has Shonen Jump. They also have Shoujo Jump, Seinen Jump, and a few others. And all of these magazines that they publish are essentially in the same format. You get chapters of the mangas that they have currently ongoing in their catalog. But they're very segregated by genre. They're divided up and they're split. And in Japan, I don't know how much subscriptions to these magazines cost. They cannot possibly cost as much as some American magazines do. Otherwise, there's no way they'd sustain this many, because that's the crazy thing about these publishers. They have so many different magazines, right? Shonen Jump in Asia is it doesn't even have as many titles as Shonen Jump does here in the US that's licensed under the name, right? So Shonen Jump has something like 22 currently publishing titles in Japan. And of those 22, 16 of them are from the last 2 years, 2 to 4 years, brand new. And only a few of them are older titles, right? But you also see there's titles that you would think would go in Shonen Jump, but are actually in one of their subsidiary magazines. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the three. What are the statistics of the three? So Kodansha is the biggest publisher. They run 27 ongoing magazines for manga. So every single one of these 27 has 3 to 30 mangas publishing in it. They're entirely all separate. There's no crossover. And sometimes mangas will move between publications. if something gets less popular with a certain demographic, it may move to a different magazine.
Most common known example, I think, to the West is JoJo. Between parts, jumped from shonen, jump to seinen.
Yeah, which is a more adult kind of themed genre. So they have 27 ongoing magazines, right? And those come out weekly and monthly. But I can't imagine that they all cost like $60 to $80, right?
No.
Or if they do, you're really picking and choosing. So it's very split up. And these are all pretty much done by genre. So there's like a shoujo one, and a seinen one, and a josei one, and a kids one, and a shonen one. You know, they're not all mixed together. And then we look at Karakawa, and Karakawa is known a lot for their light novels. So they only have 13 ongoing manga magazines, and they have 6 different light novel publications.
Although, being clear, these publications, I don't believe, include every light novel they publish.
No, they don't.
Because light novels are a different beast than manga, generally.
Yes, but in terms of magazines, they do actually publish, and each of these magazines is themed by genre. So they're, for girls or for boys or for boys love lovers.
We're sorry, a violent murder just occurred. Not sure how much that's getting cut or not, but hey, if there was a cutaway, Seki just murdered a fly.
Yeah. And then there's the third publisher, which is Shueisha, which is a split off. Anyways, so the third major publisher is Shueisha, which is a subsidiary split off from a larger company called Shogakukan.
I have not seen how it's spelled.
It's a little weird on the pronunciation for me. And Shueisha runs a whopping 36 ongoing magazines for manga publication. They also own the rights to the official Japanese Jump line, which includes Shoujo Jump, Shonen Jump, Seinen Jump, Jump X, etc. And they have 6 light novel publications as well.
This is where your Shonen Jump in the West comes from. It's sort of a collection of different titles from the different magazines here.
Yeah, and they're just licensing the Jump brand, essentially. Although they have changed it, and it's now Jump Plus, so I don't know if they're...
Yeah.
Because like I said, Shonen Weekly Magazine and Shonen Jump Magazine are 2 separate, but they sound similar. So it could be now that they're calling it Shonen Jump Plus. It's its own brand, officially. But given this, when you think about it, mangas coming out in magazines are really spread out. You'd have to be subscribed to a lot of stuff to be able to read everything you are going to read.
I think the reason why this comes up a lot is why this is kind of big is because there's been, I know online there's been a lot of question of what are Shonen Jump's big titles right now? Why does it seem like Demon Slayer might be the biggest thing they've had in a long time since My Hero, I think. And the issue is, as soon as it got popular, next thing you know, the manga's over. It just finished up. Not even a month or 2 after the final.
Yeah,
season 1 came out.
we were discussing this. So Weekly Shonen in particular and Shonen Jump, but Weekly Shonen we looked at specifically has always depended on longer running books. So they've included One Piece, Bleach, Fairy Tail, all these long shows that I always reference. Right? Because they're incredibly long running. A lot of them have been in publication with this magazine for over 10 years, right? And of the 22 titles that they are currently licensing, 16 of them are 4 years old or younger. So of the 22, only 6 of them have been publishing for longer than 4 years at most. And that's including 2020, right? Some of these mangas may be dropped in 2020, so they may not ever make it further. And the thing is, so the way Shonen Jump magazine works, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but the way it works is there's a bunch of mangas published, and they're put in order of what's most popular at the time to the reader. So there's always a way to either go online and submit a survey, or at the end send in a survey of what you want to see out of this magazine. What did you enjoy? What did you not like? And demographics and such. And they use this to determine what goes where and what gets to keep going. So shows, or I keep saying shows, books like One Piece, which is consistently popular, right? Or Dr. Stone, when it came out, it was incredibly popular, will go at the front of the magazine. And if something's not doing well, it slowly gets moved to the back. And once it starts moving to the back, if its progress isn't halted by some turnaround in the opinion of the people who are responding within, I'd say, a period of, from what I've seen, of about 6 months, it's dropped from the magazine publication entirely. And I think it's possible to get back in, but I've never actually seen it happen. Like, theoretically it is, but once it's dropped, it's highly unlikely the series will become popular enough to get it back in, because it's already lost popularity. So with the ending, right, of all these big shows, except for One Piece, but all these big shows in the last 5 years, which is that timeline we're looking at, 4 years, 16 new series is publishing.
The question's always posed, what takes their place? And there are a few obvious, like the big obvious one is Hiroaka's probably the biggest one they have that's like ongoing, but even that's seeing talks of it potentially ending soon. And Demon Slayer was the other big one that I brought up earlier, and that just ended as soon as it got popular.
Yeah, Dr. Stone wasn't very long either.
Yeah.
In fact, there is now, with because One Piece is not published in Weekly Shonen magazine. One Piece is published in a different publication. That means that out of these 22 titles, there is only one title that has been around since before about 2000, the year 2000. And that's Hajime no Ippo, which is, as some of you know, I think it's either a boxing or a wrestling sports thing that's been around since 1989.
Little things get real muddy because we know for the tradition, like even from what we know of Japanese Shonen Jump, One Piece is the big one, but like.
But that's not published in Weekly Shonen magazine. It's published in some other publication, and I didn't look up exactly which one, but I would assume it's probably something like Shonen Jump. It is published in Weekly Shonen Jump, not Weekly Shonen magazine.
I think the issue with this is because they have all these titles so far spread out amongst their magazines, it becomes an issue of you have one to three titles selling the magazine, and the other ones are just on there for basically advertising points.
And things just get dropped. And one of the problems with that is, so all these long running shows, right, they have held supremacy for so long that they are making up sales, which means that there's not nearly as much feedback about new series that they're introducing as there is about the ongoing series that have suspense. So a lot of shows aren't given enough time to build up that kind of following that One Piece or any other show might have in the 6 to 12 months that they're allowed in before their rankings start slipping. So essentially they have, I would say, 6 to 12 publications, half a year to a year, to make a big impact on the audience that's reading it. And if they don't, they leave. And this doesn't mean that these mangas stop being published, but they stop being published in the magazines, which means that they're only published either online or in Tanbakon volumes. So the actual physical book volumes.
Interesting, because I don't see this brought up very often, just how much there's a business side to it when we're talking about, oh, what's the next big three for the shonen? And
I think a lot of that is due to our Western perception of, we don't know the difference between these publications all the time. Like, we didn't know that Weekly Shonen Magazine and Shonen Jump Weekly were two different publications.
Yeah.
Right? Because we just have the American Shonen Jump, which kind of hodgepodges a few things. It's assumed that shonen is maybe the only thing published sometimes because that's the only thing we see. We don't get a publication of shoujo here in the US. We don't see seinen publications over here in the US, which means we don't really...
I'd argue Shonen Jump was only as well known as it was because a variation of the magazine was published in the US.
Exactly. So that means that we miss out on like all these other publications, but also if you ran that many publications in the US, people would not be happy.
No.
That's way too much variation.
And not all of them would do well either.
Yeah, like some of these are very specific. Like there's a shoujo one that I think Kodansha publishes that's literally called Shoujo Best Friend. So it's just about best friend shoujo mangas, right? Which, you know, that's very specific. And also, I will say in the US, we know genre names. Like we know isekai, we know shonen, but there are some that are a lot more like, not as many people know seinen or josei.
I would actually argue that this is probably the prime, like the overabundance of magazines is the prime reason we haven't seen a good subscription model.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of magazines that suddenly aren't going to sell as well. You might have to discontinue because now there's a digital model for it.
And while I say, especially with Shueisha, right, I say there's 36 ongoing, I had to count those out, discluding the discontinued ones. So there were at least 20 more magazines over the course of their publishing history, which is almost 60 years, that have been discontinued at some point or joined with another.
I can see why they haven't done a manga streaming service because of all this. At the same time, though, with this many, you gotta wonder: is there gonna be a manga crash eventually?
Yeah, like it's almost like there's an oversaturation. Like I can confidently say that Kodansha has at least 5 shonen publications, and Shueisha has at least 5. So that means you have 10 different magazines, all publishing shonen, but they're all publishing such a limited selection that if you like 6 different series, you might have to be subscribed to 6 different magazines to get them. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it's almost cheaper to just buy the books there, which are cheaper than they are here in the US.
Yeah.
But it puts the people in the US who are reading manga at a disadvantage.
Yeah, because generally your cheap solution to manga in Japan is the manga seems to be cheaper, and then the magazine subscriptions seem...
And I'm sure if you really went through and analyzed what each magazine offered,
mm-hmm.
and you can like cut subscriptions and start new ones, right? So you can move around a bit. You have some lateral freedoms.
My only question with that model is what happens when One Piece ends? What happens when you no longer have that giant earth-shattering model? A lot of the biggest anime right now are based off of light novels.
Yeah.
The manga industry, like the manga part of it, I haven't seen as many crazy large, like Hero Aka and Demon Slayer were the biggest ones. I guess Promised Neverland maybe.
Yeah, and this is something where you compare Promised Neverland, Hero Aka, and Demon Slayer, and then think about what came before them. Dragon Ball, Hajime no Ippo, One Piece, Fairy Tail, Naruto,
Demon
Bleach.
Slayer outsold One Piece this year, I'm just saying.
But you think about all those, like, and those are like the American known. Like, those are the quintessential long-running shonens that everyone has heard of, right?
And the only ones in the modern day from the shonen side are, like, the only ones I can go up to a random person and say, do you know what this is? Or Hero Aka and maybe Demon Slayer.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Stone sometimes. Promised Neverland sometimes. But once again, it depends on your personal
taste.
taste.
That stuff tends to cut more into the anime community than the general audiences, I think.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, on the general, I swear to God, you're more likely to, I swear to God, what's taken the place of shonen as far as the general audience is concerned, I legitimately think it's isekai with the light novel side.
Yeah.
Because Sword Art Online is that big, I think.
Yeah.
Konosuba, I've seen it on fucking cars.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was driving behind this one dude the other day, and on one side of his bumper, he had the Ichigo mask, and on the other side, he had Monkey D. Luffy's pirate flag, and in the middle, he had something I've never seen before, and I have no clue what it was. But, like, kudos to you for having the other two.
Yeah, but there are just some anime that you see, like, people know about it.
Yeah.
In the general, like, if you were to ask a random college or high school student, they'd probably at least have heard of it.
Yeah.
I think increasingly less that's the case with shonen to a lesser degree than previously. And
because shonen is the only magazine that made it to the US, this means that publications that are coming out in other magazines, like, for example, Arslan Senki, Grand Blue, and Shikoku no Altair are all coming out in shonen magazines, just not Shonen Jump.
Fairy Tail wasn't Shonen Jump, correct?
It was for a while. The English publication. In Japan, it wasn't in the Shonen Jump. It was in one of the other ones. But the English publication, it came out in Shonen Jump. Well, and you know, I did a lot of Googling just to get like the numbers, kind of crack the numbers right. And I think that is a startling realization that there are upwards of, at minimum, 70 different manga publications, and we're only including the 3 biggest publishers. Mm-hmm. There are smaller publishers. you know?
Which the smaller publishers each their own, but they're not the ones that people look to for like
No.
the big next things. That's where you get to like these publishers.
Yeah. And for example, I would even say, so there's one more that I would have added here if it had been 8-10 years ago. Tokyopop, actually. I would have added here as an English juggernaut. So Tokyopop was kind of what came before Viz publishing manga, and Tokyopop licensed everything for English publication. Literally everything. But the English branches of Tokyopop that were active in the US crashed and failed a while ago. So that's no longer a publisher here. It is still active in Europe, interestingly enough. Yeah, and in Japan, just not the US branch.
The US is the US is a lot more, there's a lot fewer publishers, which is fine. It's just, the US is pretty straightforward. It's just hard to get manga.
Yeah, which...
It's an expensive hobby.
Oh yeah, it's a very expensive hobby.
In Japan, though, where there's that magazine system, it seems so much more like too many magazines there.
Yeah, so the only thing I can think of is that either the magazines, there must be some sort of affordability deal, A.
Yeah.
Or B, some sort of like, oh, I subscribe to all Shonen Jump or all Jump magazines or something as a deal. Or the magazines just aren't that expensive. A magazine subscription in the US is far more expensive sometimes. Like certain magazines can cost a lot of money to get a regular publication. But it seems like it must be cheaper there. I haven't researched any prices.
Yeah, to be clear, we don't know what we're talking about here.
No, not price-wise.
And
we don't.
Culturally, this is very different than what we're used to. Because in the West, magazines are very much so those things you look at the grocery store while you're waiting in line and never buy.
Yeah. Well, and I think one other thing to note is that the US does not have... So, Japan has a massive industry for manga, right? Drawn books with pictures, essentially, right? Like all my parents would just call them comics, right? The US has a comics industry, but US comics and manga are two entirely different beasts.
I would argue your average Marvel DC comic is closer to manga than the US's newspaper comic, which is closer to like the magazine style publishing.
Well, yes, but I will say that something like an Iron Man issue, right, would be max 20, 30 pages. Like these are very, like comics are smaller, much smaller in terms of the amount of content, and they cost a fair bit. You know,
well, the comics industry has its own problems. That's like its own little spin-off of this conversation. We don't really go because that's its own complicated can of worms.
What I was trying to go with this is that manga in Japan is a form of reading. Kind of everyone has read manga at one point. Manga is manga. Japan does not have as thriving an actual novel industry. Like written novels that are just words.
Not like, we're not talking about light novels. Your light novels are doing really well in Japan.
Actual novels like the US does. We have a much bigger novel and book industry than they do. So for us, novels and books are considered more of a staple. And you'll find that a lot of people in the United States who are not intimately involved in the manga and anime community look down on manga as comic books or picture books that people who aren't mature read.
I would argue I would say that that's a problem with the way people look down on comics in general.
Yes, and that is changing. Perceptions are changing, but at the moment in the US, there's a lot of prejudice against it.
Against comics overall.
Yeah, and for the uninitiated, for those who are not aware of the differences, they would consider them a single beast. So there's...
I would still choose two different countries of origin.
True, but at the same time, there are a vast majority of people that if you ask on the streets will be like, oh, like comic books.
Because they are. I mean, when you think about it, the comic books, like the single issues are basically what you'd be getting out of a Shonen Jump. Except, and then they do have the collection ones, which is more like a manga. Yeah. Like the full, you said the Japanese name earlier.
But,
the full, like,
Tanbakon.
Yeah.
But in terms of books, right, Japan has a much more thriving industry for manga books, the Tanbakon volumes, than the US does. So it's a lot harder to get them in the US, and they are not yet seen as on par with novels or books.
At the same time, in Japan, you don't have that Harry Potter book set.
No, you don't at all.
You know,
and when you do, they're classics like The Tale of Genji. or something ridiculous like that.
Like, let's take a look at like Overlord spread out over so many books.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are like a third the size of Harry Potter, of the later Harry
Yeah,
Potter
and
books.
that's what I'm saying, is that I think there's a different culture surrounding manga and books, right, in the US and Japan. And that contributes in a lot of ways to how anime caught on faster than manga did.
Mm-hmm.
And will probably always be ahead in a lot of ways from manga. Okay, and then I compare. So I have visited Russia several times, right?
Yes.
And Russia has this interesting thing with like books, right? Is that we have no books and then War and Peace. Or we have Dostoevsky and, you know, all of them like War and Peace and translated books from English or other countries. Russia does not have a particularly thriving novel industry either. They have a lot of classics, but they don't have an overall thriving novel industry, right? And it's not very popular to read there. It's just not a popular thing. Grandma yells at me for reading. Like, actually yells at me for reading. It's very traumatizing. And this is a cultural thing. I mean, every idiot with a pen can produce and sell a book in the US. You don't even have to have a pen. You can be a fan fiction writer who wants to change the names of your characters and then post it as an ebook on Amazon for profit. You do not need like any real backing other than your own time and willingness.
We're completely oversimplifying the publishing industry in the United States, by the way. Don't take what we're saying seriously. It is actually a bit of a trouble to get published in an actual, like, for actual, not just throwing it up on Amazon. Yeah.
For actual paper books that would be sold at Barnes & Nobles or another authorized retailer, it is much harder to get published.
Yeah.
Multiple reviews, tons of editing, that kind of stuff. But we also have the ability to kind of publish anything.
Yeah.
If you're willing to put it up on Amazon as a book, you know, or some other website like that. And so why we have Wattpad.
I mean, if you were to look at the big popular stuff in the US that the world has heard about, you get like your Harry Potters, and that's the kind of stuff that's like.
We have a thriving young adult novels.
Yeah.
The US and Britain have a thriving young adult novel industry. So like books for people ages 10 to 25.
The stuff you hear about coming out of Japan on that equivalent tends to be like the light novel industry. It's just such a different, like technically light novel is a classification for books here too,
but
you
it's
just
a
don't
different
see
beast.
You don't see them in this. Like if you're seeing light novels news, you're thinking like the kids' novels, like what, Magic Treehouse.
Yeah, or because we have a different classification system. If you look at books, right?
Yeah.
Look at NaNoWriMo. You can choose from 4 book lengths. You can choose short story, novella, novel, and I forget the 4th one.
And light novels are probably closest to novella.
And we count them by word count, right? So for novels, you have to have 40,000 words approximately.
I think light novels are the same thing where it's counted by word count.
Yeah, novellas are about 20,000. Short stories are anything kind of under.
I don't know specifically what it was, but like I do know that there is a word count that and this goes like Sword Art Online. The reason why it seems so weird is it's actually 2 books, one that published like the beginning and the end, and one that published all the middle bits.
Yeah, so it's we have this massive juggernaut of physical novels coming out of English-speaking countries that are targeted to the young adult audience, which is the people that have the desire and or funds to also be buying manga, right? So, because generalizing, you're not going to find a child under the age of 7 begging for manga from their parents and their parents giving it to them, generally. And you're not necessarily going to find someone over the age of, I'd say, 35, unless they got into it when they were younger. Like a normal 35-year-old will generally not get into manga at that age. And like I said, I am generalizing. This could be fairly off, but I feel like that's a safe assumption to make. Also, books are a dying industry in the US anyways. And that bothers me a lot, and that is its own rant.
Remember the days that everyone was talking about books in middle school?
Yes. Remember the days when you could get a pizza party for reading a bunch of words? Anyways, but There is a difference in the way things are published in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, in the US, manga is still seen as one of those niche things from Asia. And that's changing fast, right?
It's overtaking your own comics industry.
Oh, it is. And they're getting bigger and bigger sections in stores. People are knowing more about them. But yeah, PSA, buy books. But I don't know. I think the combination of all of these reasons, assumptions, and the way things are kind of seen still in the US is why manga doesn't really prosper as its own industry, as opposed to how it does in Japan.
I also think for similar reasons, the comics industry in general isn't doing very well in the US.
Yeah, well, if you didn't charge so much for a fucking magazine.
I don't know. We aren't exactly being charged all that much less for
that's fair.
comparatively for the manga. So
that's fair. Manga is incredibly expensive in the US. We talked about this in our last video, but it is like a minimum of essentially $10 to $14 a volume. More obviously if you're buying compilation volumes, but the advantage you get with compilation volumes is you get like 5 in one for like $36, which is technically a better price. Which is why
you're more likely to spend slightly longer on it. So if you're not reading at the speed of a seki, it'll last you a while.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are ways to kind of subset your prices as well. You can always buy from a used bookstore. You can order online if you really want something and just can't find it. A lot of stuff was published in English by Tokyo Pop, but was not renewed under an English publisher. Although I have noticed some old Tokyo Pop titles have gotten renewed. Fruits Basket got renewed under a different publisher.
That's why they got their new anime series.
Yeah, they've been renewed for a while under a new publisher, but for a while they were not being published in the US because Tokyo Pop had gone under. Cardcaptor Sakura was also owned by Tokyo Pop for the English publication originally.
And notice they recently got more anime as well.
Yeah, so I think you also have to keep in mind what is available and what isn't. Right. And while I would genuinely love to pay full price and buy manga and support the author, right? I have never seen an American novel series that ran for 98 or 96 books. 96 like One Piece.
How long is Magic Treehouse?
A Magic Treehouse is not that long and the books are a little cheaper.
Yeah.
Magic Treehouse, I think, has only the official Magic Treehouse series, I think, only ran for about 50 books. And then Merlin missions are currently running. I think it's another 40 or so.
We're hitting some real deep cuts here.
Yeah, but you also don't pay $12 a book for them if you're buying them paperback.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the other thing is mangas are usually sold paperback. And I have so much trouble based on American book prices in paying $10 to $15 for a paperback book that's not as long as most novels I read. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read a 500-page novel that only cost me $5.99. But then a 100-and-something page manga cost me $12.99.
I think maybe we start wrapping this up because we are really getting far off topic here.
We are.
We can extend this on for hours, I'm sure.
I'm sure we could. But, I mean, I think in the end, it comes down to the way it's published in Japan is why we don't get as much of a diffusion in the US.
Yeah.
These three publishers do not cooperate with one another on the grand scale of things. And they keep all of their manga fairly well separated, so it's incredibly hard to get one collective publication, right? And because of this, it's hard to get all of these good things licensed for a decent price. So you're forced to pay either the plain prices, which are $8 to $14, or find it somewhere ripped, or used.
Well, I think this has been us speaking about another country's culture out of our ass. That always goes well.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? No hate. If you know something more about this subject and you happen to watch this, please, I would love to hear about it in the comments.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely. Because we've never been to Japan.
A lot of this is us voicing out, like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
A lot of these last couple talking to dudes. Like, this is just the result of us, like, being like running around like chickens with our heads cut off trying to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, like we kind of went into a deep hole a couple weeks ago that got us started on all this, and we would love to know more in depth if someone has more information. But with that being said, we will endeavor to try harder, and you should too.
You said it.